Let's talk about what's going on right now between Israel and Iran. We've just learned that Iran has seized an Israeli ship in the Strait of Hormuz. How do you see the current situation of this conflict? Is Israel hoping for Iran to react so violently to bring the United States into this conflict?
Nima, you've put your finger on it. That is clearly Israel's aim. Striking Iranian territory, that consulate in Damascus is protected, is considered the territory of Iran, killing, I think it was 7 very high officials, 2 of them generals. It was a provocation, pure and simple. It could only have been done by the Israelis, but the U.S. has not condemned it. And, this is really designed to up the ante, as we say, and provoke the Iranians into doing something really violent that would draw the U.S. in defense of Israel. Now, is that going to work? Would Iran do something that violent? Well, they've threatened for sure that they will retaliate. Retaliate, of course, for that April 1 bombing or missile attack on the Iranian embassy in Damascus. For what form that will take? Well, the Iranians are pretty clever people. They want, above all, to avoid an open confrontation with the United States. They know the pressures that the Israel lobby puts on politicians, including the President of the United States. And so then I got to play that game. And my guess, and it's a little premature right now, but, it would make good sense to Iran follow through on the threat it made on Tuesday, which said, we could always close off the Strait of Hormuz, we can always block ships from going through there. Now that's far more significant than blocking access to the Red Sea. The amount of oil that goes through, I think the last time I checked, it was about 30% of the world's oil in trade goes through the Strait of Hormuz. So now they've done it. They did it today. They did it to an Israeli-owned, at least partially owned, cargo ship. Okay, they didn't shoot it up. They landed on it by helicopter and they took it into Iranian waters. So, wow, that's big. So, what kind of reaction is that going to elicit? I don't think, as outlandish as sometimes US policymakers are, I don't think they're going to start shooting up Iranian bases near the Strait of Hormuz, as they are doing to the much weaker Houthis, who have pretty courageously taken on those ships in the Red Sea. Now, the Red Sea embargo, if you will, has hurt Israel economically. Closing the Strait of Hormuz, well, that would hurt everyone, but I don't think the Iranians have to close it completely. They could just sort of single out Israeli-owned, Israeli-bound, Israeli-connected cargo ships, oil ships, whatever. So this, in my view, is a pretty clever move. What's the U.S. going to do? Well, the U.S. naval authorities in the area have this. I'll just read you this thing. This was the advice that the U.S. naval authorities have given out. This is according to Reuters. The Joint Maritime Information Center, run by a Western-led naval coalition, said, get this, vessels, ships intending to navigate the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy routes, should exercise caution and not loiter. Okay, so they're going to make a dashboard. I can make a. Oh, anyhow, that's the best advice that has been given to these folks. It's going to be very difficult for the U.S. and the so-called Western powers to intervene here because the Strait of Hormuz is dominated by Iran, and they can easily make exceptions for oil cargo going to China and everything else. So, in a way, it's as I expected, not a very violent move, but a very clever move, it seems to me. How is the U.S. going to react? I don't know. It scares me to death as to how they might react anyway. But right now, Iran has the upper hand, and it doesn't have to do the kind of provocative act that would ipso facto have the presidency and our Congress authorize even more, not only vocal, but armed, defensive, offensive armed support for Israel.
We know that Europeans who were not talking about this attack on Iranian consulate in Syria, right now they're talking about the Israeli ship. How do you see the behavior on the part of Europeans?
Well, Nima, the collective West, headed by the United States, prescinds from international law. That makes international law, as we have known it since World War II, irrelevant. We have this international, what do we call it? We call it rules-based international system. Well, what rules? Well, the rules are what the United States makes the rules. So don't you understand? Now, the rules are broken flagrantly. I mean, bear in mind that even during World War II, consulates and embassies were sovereign, protected entities. Hitler, Mussolini didn't go after them, okay? And now, now, do we know who did this? Well, the U.S. will not say, and the collective West will not say, well, who could have done this with such precision? You've probably seen the photographs. They obliterated the consulate right next door to the embassy. Embassy hardly has a scratch on it. Well, 3 cheers for Israeli precision, but who else has that kind of precise targeting information? So it's clearly the Israelis. The fact that the U.S. and the rest of a lot of people don't condemn it is just a crass demonstration that there is no respect for international law. It's just the rules-based international system. And again, who makes the rules? We make the rules. Now, if you look up rules-based international system, as you probably know, I mean, you'll find it in the dictionary. You won't find it in any law books or anything. That's because it hasn't been defined yet in a more precise way. And it's a little awkward to define it as rules-based means whatever the U.S. says the rules are.
How much this kind of activities on the part of Israelis, this confrontation between Israelis and Iranians are related to what's going on right now in Gaza, in Rafah?
I think the basic reality, Nima, is that Israel is not winning. Israel expected to complete this operation pretty quickly, and they're bogged down. They actually withdrew many brigades that they had in Gaza. I think there's only one left. So, number one, they're not prepared to do what Netanyahu is threatening. Even if they bomb the hell out of the 1.4 million Gazans cooped up there in Rafah, they're still not going to be able to advance and kill the Hamas people who are underground and so forth. So that's the background here. So what's Israel doing? They want the U.S. in. How do they do that? They provoke Iran and hope Iran returns the favor, so to speak, provokes the United States or Israel. Israel is very vulnerable now. It's not like Iran can't retaliate. They can obliterate Israel if the need arises, and the Israelis know that. So how do they deter this kind of thing? Well, by getting the U.S. involved. And that's, of course, precisely why the Iranians are pretty smart people. And they've said all along, we don't want to get involved with the United States, but they warn the United States, look, to the degree you're a co-belligerent, you won't escape retaliation either. And of course, we have sitting ducks in the amount of 2,500 U.S. soldiers in Iraq, about 900 U.S. soldiers in Syria, sitting ducks for revolutionary cadre, some of them armed and supported by Iran, but pretty much mostly of their own volition is how they proceed. So the U.S. is in a really vulnerable position, and it's just my hope that it will dawn on the policymakers in Washington that they've been outsmarted, and that it's probably good now to be a little bit more objective in telling the American people, look, these Israelis are really good friends, but they lie a lot. Lie a lot? Yeah, remember when they told us that Iran was working on a nuclear weapon? When they said that Iran was just as close to having a nuclear weapon? Remember that? Netanyahu at the UN and all that stuff? That was all poppycock. That was all bollocks, is what the British call it. It was all BS. What do you mean it's all BS? Well, this is a good story. Let me just tell it. This is the one instance in my career of 27 years and earlier and since where I saw a national intelligence estimate written by the CIA and the whole intelligence community take a large step in preventing a larger war. Let me explain, because it's a good case study. Back in, of course, 2002, the intelligence community, the folks I used to work with, for God's sake, they let themselves be corrupted to the point of serving up evidence that was not there, evidence that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. James Clapper, who later became the head of the whole shebang, the whole National Intelligence Director, he confessed in his book, as though we would forgive him. He said, there was so much pressure from Dick Cheney and from the White House to find weapons of mass destruction that we found things that weren't really there. Found things that weren't really there. Wow. And so we went to war. So what I'm saying is, back in 2002, 2003, my former colleagues and the rest of the intelligence community lied through their teeth because Dick Cheney said lie, and they lied, and they started at the first, in my view, the first clearly war of aggression that the U.S. actually initiated. Okay, now, so that's 2003, 2000, where really things go really bad, and then somebody says, now we got to get Iran. Who says that? Cheney, Bush, Rumsfeld, and the Israel lobby, who were all over the Pentagon and the White House saying, look, we got to get Iran now, got to get Iran. So somebody, I don't know who it was, but somebody said, let's not let the intelligence community be corrupted into ginning up a national intelligence estimate that justifies war on Iran, as Bush and Cheney trot off into the western sunset in 2008, which was their plan. Okay, now here's how it went down. They went around looking for somebody to chair this estimate, some senior figure with an honest reputation, and they couldn't find anybody. That's a better way. They couldn't find anybody in the CIA. So finally they said, look, where else could, oh yeah, there was that fellow that took all those dissenting footnotes in that estimate that said there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. His name was Tom Finger. Yeah, he's head of the State Department intelligence. Let's ask him to do an estimate on how close Iran is to getting a nuclear weapon. Okay. And they asked Tom, and I know Tom, and he says, I said, no, I don't want to get involved with that bunch. I know how that's going to come out. And they said, look, Tom, you can do it in secret. You can bring your own honest people, your own experienced analysts in from the State Department. We won't bother you. We'll give you a year to do it. Will you please do it? We need to make sure that this time the estimate is honest and doesn't justify another, even worse attack, this time on Iran. So Tom said, all right, I'll do it. Well, he worked in secret during the whole of 2007. He he was in receipt of some really very helpful, I can't tell you exactly what kind of information he got. It was very, very good information. And in November of 2007, right? So November 2007, where Bush and Cheney had yet another year, okay? He issued this estimate and he made it public right away. And it said, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2002 and has not resumed work on a nuclear weapon. We say this unanimously and with high confidence. Whoa! No, that hit the streets, and it was under Congress had a copy of it. It was really well. Let me put it this way: we analysts have to read everything, even memoirs of people like George W. Bush. Okay, in his memoir, he says that eye-popping estimate did us bad. It deprived me. This is a quote. It deprived me of the military option against Iran. For how could I possibly use our armed forces to strike the armed forces and nuclear facilities of a country that the intelligence community says has no nuclear weapons program? Bummer! Bush goes off to Tel Aviv and apologizes to them. Say, I think they're wrong, but there it is. Okay. In other words, that prevented a larger war against Iran. 2007, as I said before, that's the only national intelligence estimate that I know of that actually contributed largely to preventing a terrible war. So what am I saying now? There aren't any national intelligence estimates anymore. The analysts have all been smooshed together with the operations people, creating targets for them, justifying their covert actions and so forth. So there is no independent analysis group. There's no Tom Finger. He's out at Stanford teaching. No Tom Finger around. So we're in bad shape. We're in badder shape. Right? We're in worse shape now than we were back then. But back then, there was a chance to get this right. Right now, we have the kind of flunkies running the intelligence community who tell the president, as William Burns told the president in the first week of July last year, the Russians in Ukraine have suffered a strategic defeat. The ineptitude of their military forces has been laid bare for the whole world to see.
Netanyahu said that if they go to a direct war with Hezbollah, we don't need the United States to help us. When it comes to such statements, who would be the target of these statements?
You know, there's such a thing as a mousetrap tactic, and that is if indeed Israel, as it has threatened, goes up north against Hezbollah, well, last time did that, they lost, okay? Yeah, Israel, the IDF lost. What makes them think they can win this time? Well, I think they think that since Biden still hugs Netanyahu every chance he gets, that they can mousetrap the U.S. into supporting them if they get into a real imbroglio in Lebanon against Hezbollah. Now, he may be right about that, for God's sake. I mean, more and more naval ships and so forth are going in that direction. So he's not really being disabused of that notion. Why not try? Remember that Netanyahu is under similar political pressure within Israel. In other words, if he loses office or he's removed, he's going to end up in jail. There are 2 or 3 lawsuits that are against him for corruption. He and his wife, maybe they'll have a nice dual cell there in jail, but that's his human future. So this plays into Netanyahu as well as it plays into Biden, Sullivan, and Blinken. And they have to look after their own future. And so Netanyahu is going to do everything he can. And, if he's replaced, it may be a little better for a little while, but these people that are likely to replace him are just as just hard against the Palestinians and for a Palestinian genocide as the others.
You told me that you were participating in a live streaming of the funeral of Bishop Thomas Gumbleton, and you were expecting to talk about Gaza and what's going on in Gaza. And on the other hand, I want to talk about the American senator who was asking Lloyd Austin, do you have any evidence that what's going on in Gaza is a genocide? He said, no, we don't have any evidence to prove that.
This is a former general, 4-star, who was head of Central Command when we were training moderate terrorists in a little slice of Syria to do Bedlam in the rest of Syria and elsewhere. He painted a rosy picture of the prospects for our involvement, covert involvement at the time in Syria, and his analysts at CENTCOM and at the Defense Intelligence Agency said, this is bollocks. It's crazy. We don't write that. He falsifies that at the very top of CENTCOM. They not only said that, but they went to the Inspector General of the Pentagon and they said, we're trying to do an honest job here. General Austin, who runs this operation, is falsifying the intelligence. Please look into it. The Pentagon looked into it, and as typical, they had I think a brigadier general, 1-star, investigating 4-star Austin. You know how that one came out, right? So he wouldn't do that. We appreciate your concern, but we don't find it. Well, of course he did. Now, so he's eminently qualified to gin up information about Ukraine or about Gaza, right? Wrong. So who told Biden and Bill Burns, the head of CIA, that Putin had already lost the war back last July? Well, it probably was Austin and the corrupted intelligence that he served up to all these people. William Burns should know better, but you blend in with the indigenous. You could kind of, all right, okay. So there's Austin. Now, on this particular this questioning in the Senate just 2 days ago, he is asked about whether Ukraine can win, and I think I already said, oh yeah, it can win, and then he says, of course it's going to win because Russia invaded, or the whole business, okay. And then he's asked about Syria. Is this a genocide? You think it's a genocide in Syria, General Mr. Secretary Austin? And he says he's really not a very bright guy on this one. He says, well, I don't have any evidence of genocide. And so Senator Tom Cotton says, so you're saying there is no genocide in Gaza, right, Secretary Austin? And he says, well, we don't have any evidence of genocide in Gaza. Now, not only was that completely off the wall and evidently untrue, but he didn't have to answer that one. I mean, that's not his call. He's not an international lawyer. He doesn't have to speak for the White House. He could have easily said, Senator Cotton, that's not my purview. A genocide has a specific legal meaning. The International Court of Justice has said that there's a plausible genocide going on there, but I'm not the guy you asked for that. Instead of doing that, he's as a team member, he's part of the team. He's going, I don't see any evidence of that. I don't see. I mean, they should have asked him, Secretary Austin, there's a spilled cup of coffee right on your table there. Do you have any evidence that somebody was drinking coffee here? I don't see any evidence. It's just so sad because you have people who lie through their teeth. And Cotton, of course, got the answer he wanted. I I won't describe what I think of Tom Cotton because it doesn't really matter, but he was out to get the right answer. And if anybody's interested or anyone watched that news clip, well, now you know that all this business about genocide, 33,000 people killed in Gaza so far, most of them children. Well, the Secretary of Defense says no evidence of that.
You didn't elaborate on the funeral of Bishop Thomas Gumbleton.
I think it's an important issue, not so much Tom Gumbleton, who was a good friend of mine, but the whole notion of where are the moral authorities today? Back during World War II, as we painfully know, the Catholics, the Lutherans in Germany, they could not find their voice. They could not speak out against genocide. The Vatican wrote an encyclical that nobody could understand. What's an encyclical? Asked Albert Camus after the war. Never heard about it, okay? So as Camus says, in issues of great importance for morality, like genocide, the church should speak out in so clear a manner that the simplest person, man or woman, can understand where the church's moral authorities stand. Well, we've got genocide going on now, and with U.S. to say U.S. support, that doesn't do it justice. It's the sine qua non. Without U.S. support, there would be no genocide, and Joe Biden, who is described as a Catholic, just kind of provides the wherewithal for the Israelis to continue to kill people. Now, does it have to be 6 million as in World War II? I don't think so. It could be just 1 million or just 2.5 million. But already 33,000 people have been killed. And the Russians, the Israelis have been very clear in saying that exactly what they intend to do. So just bringing us, Bishop Gumbleton was a practitioner of what we call la Theologia de Liberación, in English, liberation theology, which said we should care first and foremost about the poor. And in those days, when John the 23rd appointed good bishops who had their heads screwed on right, they wrote a pastoral and they said, we have talked about the preferential option for the poor. Those are high-sounding words. We're going to tell you what it means. And the U.S. Catholic bishop said, the preferential option for the poor means no one is entitled to amass more of what he or she does not need when other people lack the necessities of life. Now, that didn't go over well with wealthy Catholics, but they said it. Now, Bishop Gumbleton was one of those people. Now, he used to go to Iraq. He went to Iraq regularly after the war in 91, okay? Desert Storm, it was called. And he used to have a special heart for Iraqi children. And each time he came back, he would say, well, if I go back to Iraq next time, those children that I sat in my lap will be dead, okay? And when 500,000 Iraqi children below the age of 5 were dead because of U.S. sanctions, Gumbleton single-handedly rallied up the good U.S. bishops and said, this is unconscionable. And he got them all to say that, okay? Unconscionable. Now, one of my friends asked Bishop Gumbleton, my God, that's unprecedented. How did the White House react to all of your bishops saying unconscionable? And he smiled and he said, well, in reality, the White House looks on us as a possible 287 votes. But if we had gone back to our dioceses, if we had called our pastors together and said, you will preach this in the pulpit on Sunday, there are 76 million Catholics in this country, in the United States, then the White House would have to take us seriously. Well, the last thing I'll say is that here we have a genocide going on, and a prime practitioner of La Teología de Liberación, Liberation Theology, being buried at age 94 and being complimented for all the piety and all the nice things he said, but nobody mentions his focus on the poor. Instead, you have this altar set up where you have 9 cardinals with high hats and red hats and so forth, and then bishops, about 25 of them in front pews. That's not what Tom Gumbleton would have wanted. He would have wanted the poor up there, the poor to whom he ministered, okay? The only saving grace was the gospel choir, and I'm sure Tom insisted on that. More significantly, I made a little note here. There was only one mention of justice and peace in the proper order, okay? Let me explain. The concept of shalom, in its biblical sense, is neither more nor less than the experience of justice. So, peace and justice, you got that wrong. Justice has to precede the experience of shalom, of peace. So, who mentioned justice and peace in the proper order? One of the women. One of the women, unfrocked, of course, because there are women priests during one of the prayers of the faithful. And then, whoa, then one of the other women, there were 2 women, says, you know, we're called to be doers of the word. And I'm waiting. The rest of that sentence is, and not only hearers, right? That was lopped off. The final thing I'll just say was really, really amazing. At one point, Mary, mother of Jesus, was mentioned in a very laudatory way, of course, about how wonderful she was. And they never mentioned the Magnificat that's in Luke, okay? It's when they gave Mary a chance to say something, okay? These scripture writers. And what she said, you'll see why she falls off the radar screen after she says this. She said, Jesus has come, and his mission is to fill up the poor with good things and let the rich go away hungry. Whoa. So Mary was into the redistribution of wealth. That's what we would call it today, you know? Send the rich away empty, okay? So when that came up, guess what they forgot? Guess what part they forgot? That about building up the rich and that's building up the poor, which was whole Tom Gumbleton's shtick, okay? And sending the rich away empty. Well, you know, that wouldn't work in our society where people are profiteering on war. The rich get richer and the poor poorer. Here was a splendid opportunity to honor the spirit of Tom Gumbleton and at least say one word about the heinous genocide and hunger and starvation that's going on now. And they blew it. As I was telling my wife before, they pretty much hijacked Tom Gumbleton, they being the institutional church. Now, I'm down on the institutional church, but I remain a devotee of Pope John the 23rd. The things she stood for, I think the preferential option for the poor is what Jesus is all about. And I think if he didn't make that clear and turn over those tables in the temple and send the rich away empty, he could have died as a Hebrew prophet very comfortably in his bed. That's not what happened to him. And I think I know what happened to him. It's going to happen to those of us who try to follow his lead. It's not a pretty sight, but it's much more than a ceremony with 9 cardinals backing up the preacher. thanks for giving me a chance to emote about this. It was kind of a sad thing for me to see this missed chance. I tried to get there, I couldn't. Many of my friends were there. I'm sure they were equally scandalized by the fact that Catholic Church has said nothing about genocide. And of course, if the bishops don't, then the pastors don't have to either. And they don't have to endanger the collection plate for how many wealthy people might think that that they're preaching the wrong gospel. Thanks, Nima.
My pleasure, Ray.